Hello, and welcome to another draw-on episode of Keen on Architecture. We are in the Western Civ section using design markers now. We've made our way to the end of the 19th century, into the 20th century. Then we'll start talking about the last phase for this 10 sequence sessions, modern architecture. So this is kind of a hybrid now because the images of the architecture will be historical, but the structure of it is fully modern. We're in structural steel now, building skyscrapers. So in order to study that, we're going to look at a very famous competition from 1923. The competition actually put out in 22 by the time they actually started building the Chicago Tribune Tower in Chicago along Michigan Avenue, and a 2-year period there before the Depression in 1929. It had attracted some 260 design submissions to design this tower for Cyrus McCormick, who is the owner of the Chicago Tribune. So there's a competition in 2 major American cities that sort of spawned the idea of building vertically. As land got more expensive in a dense area, it forced people to build up to get more value out of the cost of the land. So a remarkable competition yielded this winning scheme here by Hood and Howell, a firm that submitted and introduced Neo-Gothic tendencies, as you can see by the kind of the spire up top here, kind of patterned after Rouen Cathedral in France or possibly the Tower of Malines in Belgium, which they're trying to put an artifice on top of the modernity on the inside. So modern architecture was there, just hadn't been allowed to be fully shown unless it was engineered structures like railroad sheds, prisons, hospitals, things that are more tectonic and less in the public realm. So certainly an award-winning newspaper can't have something that was rotely modern at this time. It's too premature for that. And so we'll draw that next to one that came a precursor a couple years earlier. We'll see in tandem then. We'll start with the Gothic Tower, and we'll move over to the more neoclassical tower of the Wrigley Building, which shares kind of the site. They bracket the gateway to Magnificent Mile on the north branch of Michigan Avenue. But we'll start first with Hood and Howell's scheme here too. More importantly, though, what this does, it starts the investment in the growth of tower design, which again, Chicago is strongly involved with. As you look at sort of the city plan of a section of Chicago around Sears Tower here, that most of Chicago now is still on that race to build vertically on their site. So it really is an economical equation of budget, cost of the land, and then the program for the building is to build taller and taller. And obviously this is the mantra of any urban area now globally, as now some of the world's tallest buildings are outside the United States. The Burj Dubai is the largest building in Asia at this point, as well as globally. So we see then the language of this giving import to the potential of what structural steel can do in terms of shaping architecture in the modern movement, which will be the last 2 sessions of our topic for Western Civ Day. It takes all the 20th century. Then we follow up with another short course of 10 images on the modern movement itself, and we'll talk about the 4 modern masters. So what we're going to do here is look at this view of the 2 towers side by side here. Maybe I'll put it on this side. More space. And we'll start with the Neo-Gothic Tower, which was the competition, which is more of a remarkable type of piece of historic prose here in terms of the response to it. So with working with our number 2 pencil, we'll talk about some of the ideas implemented here. First at the base, we'll come down to the eye height of somebody who's standing across the river from it, and note this being the horizon line that runs across. And yet where the person is walking is actually ramping up a bit on the riverside edge of Wabash, the upper deck of Wabash. It's a unique sort of 2-tiered street that wraps around the river edge. And so at that point, the arc of the railing detail is going down towards Michigan Avenue. And then the edge of the street, the curve the person's walking, it goes like this, the other direction. So what we're going to do then is have the person on that walkway where the 3-foot rail in the distance edges than the river edge itself. So we'll build that up in terms of the base for knowing now that we're across the river. This is the access point to seeing the river at the base of it. Then we'll cross a little light bastion here to the other side, and we'll see the base of the Wrigley rise up, and then we'll see across Michigan Avenue the base of the great Gothic, Neo-Gothic tower by Hood and Howell. This tower by Wrigley, built on nickels at a time, because basically Wrigley is the magnate who developed Wrigley chewing gums. And so those packs of gum for 5 cents, collected 1 nickel at a time, built this magnificent neoclassical building a bit earlier than the Neo-Gothic tower here. So what we're going to do to kind of make these things form a shape, we'll simply draw the boxes they're inscribed in, because they're both on difficult sites here as the river bends, the angle of Michigan Avenue turns a bit away from the grid. So this is a trapezoidal site. This is orthographic and perpendicular to it, so we can simply draw in the edge of the box that's going back to our horizon line. So here is the south side, which connects back to a point off the page to the right, and the left side that goes to a point maybe a little bit closer, doesn't quite make the page when it meets the horizon at this point, but maybe a couple inches off. Oh, excuse me, this is the one we're looking at right there. So again, any horizontals we'll see here, for instance, the back end of the Wrigley, are going back to that point as well. And then because they're towers, we will cant them up a little bit to a third point, and the center line for that is right between the 2 towers, where somewhere up here, well advanced off the page, these verticals are going to ascend to. And so this particular image is nice because it doesn't eclipse the front elevation. We get a little bit of space and gap between them. So here's the corner of the box of our tower proper. And now the outside one is going to cant a little bit more. They're still parallel, but you can see they're gracefully kind of running up to that same point high up. A little more obvious now, because it's further away from that center line, are the edges of the Wrigley, which are going to tilt up because, again, they're towers and we're fairly close to them, and rush up toward that third point well up here. So you have left and right, and the top point if you're drawing very tall buildings, if you're close to them. If we're further away, let's say across the loop, we had a view of them as well, they end up being more purely parallel. Closer you get to the tower, the more it draws this point down, and the more diagonal the vertical lines begin, if you're really close up at the base of the building. Now, the proportion of this is such that it's a simple box that rises up. All these towers can be similar to that because it basically is a grid of steel girders in vertical and horizontal paths, but it's got chamfered corners on it. So it can then meet the octagonal shape up by these flying buttresses, taken back from as early as Notre Dame's first implementation of those as sort of a stylistic and structural prose for the Gothic. So this is then about 800 years later, when they're still employing these, probably not quite so necessary, but sort of decorative way to create a finial for the top of the whole space. But the plan of it is octagonal with another sort of accessory point behind it, we'll see, that faces the lakeside. So the promontory real areas have this cupola then face the great view from Michigan Avenue looking north until you get to 1 mag mile there. And then we see the essence of the backside trail off at a lower level, and then finally come down to its endpoint. So at the top, we've got the outline of these great 8 pieces. We'll be able to see 4 of them in our frontal view. 1, 2, 3, and then the far one on the right, 4 come down. And on top of that is yet another octagon, and then a third octagon on top of that one. So again, we'll have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And one more time, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it kind of steps up like a wedding cake to finish up the top. Then we drop down these shafts beneath it. And those chamfered corners, the one that faces us, kind of erodes that squared off edge. Now we'll have a flat face, flat, turned 45 degrees from it, and then flat again on this side. We'll do the same over here. We'll come over and do the edge pieces. This is done with a major block of this. It has a U-shaped plan, which allows light to come in from the west to light the wall offices that go inside that courtyard effect. Comes down to the edge of its property and then diminishes back down to grade. It's got almost in the length of a column detail, even though it's a big building block with hundreds of windows in it. It does have the sense of having a base like a column, a shaft like a column, and then in a sense a capital. So the necking of it, the head of the capital, and a little bit of a cornice at the top. So in those classical proportions, it's kind of, again, heading back to the classical language we studied earlier and adhering that to a modern skyscraper. And then it's got its own tower in Finland here. In this case, it's going to be a clock tower, and that rises up as a rotation. Now coming from Michigan Avenue, they'll see the corner of the box, which rotates the face, and so we only see one flat side of it. So it rotates away from the main shape here. And you can see that in elevation, that we're drawing it from this side. So we're not going to see much more than a little bit of the east side here, the southeast side. And that'll help to show a little bit of projection back towards the horizon line and see that face of it go up. And so just see the flat edge will make it a two-dimensional plane. So that little sliver of light there is going to be really important to us on that side of it. Up top then, it's got another block that supports its cupola as it rises up, and then on top of that is this sort of very traditional for the time in the 20s and 30s when they built out these towers in New York and Chicago. Little types of tempiettos and architectural features all the way at the top, like we've done, for instance, at a couple of buildings already in this 10 session, working through Western culture to its finial piece. And we'll save this for now, but here is the clock tower, which presents the time to Chicagoans in the loop every day. So again, our view shed here is, we set up Wrigley first. We're sort of the grade across the street, looking up the tower, and then right across, coming between this, and they're almost like the king and queen of a chess set, which guard Michigan Avenue along the river edge here. So a very short distance away then is looking up to the height of the Neo-Gothic Tribune Tower. Now at the time, they would have been the only two towers here this close to the river. What's happened in this view shed over here has been built out with more and more structures, but to show you what the scale of the city was at the time, this is in more of a time-lapsed photo from back in the day, if these were just under construction, about the height of the city as it steps down to the river edge. And the lack of other buildings there is because in 1871, Chicago had a massive fire. 2/3 of the city from, if this is sort of the length of the city of Chicago along Lake Michigan, starting down the southwest, 2/3 of the city was completely razed because it was basically as a lightweight wooden frame city post-Civil War. And so it took a couple days to burn out. It kind of stopped lastly at the crossing of the Chicago River up here. And so what they did was they shoveled all the debris and created new land in the lake to build on the other side of Michigan Avenue, and then started to rapidly rebuild the city, an incredible building campaign where 15, 20, 30 buildings a day were under construction. So within 20 years, it was really the fastest growing city in America, if not the Western culture. And with that came the legacy of this design paradigm of building vertically and being as close to Lake Michigan and Chicago River as possible for the value of those lands. So the competition then was very interesting because, again, if 260 designs were submitted from many countries around the world, Mexico, Cuba, Luxembourg, Australia, Finland, France, Germany, a lot of architects were just really engaged in this because they saw it as a motivation to maybe make change away from rote historicism. Because everybody knows that if you take off the skirt or the dress around here, you were looking at a new form of architecture. And yet it wasn't decorative, it wasn't finished in a sense from most people thought architecture should be. So now we'll come in and do a little bit of line work in terms of striating the numbers of windows that come down on the sides of both buildings. And so basically there's a set of paired windows in the front face here. So if we simply do a center point, another center point, we'll put two sets of windows between each bay as we mark these off down the way here. There's a secondary base above here, which runs down and meets that one. If this turns the corner and goes back in. And then the same thing runs down this way, but on this side it's longer, so there's a 5 set, so the lines will be closer together. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then carry those down. So now we have at least sort of a pattern to install some of the windows. If we do them all, make them too detailed, it's too much of a subject given our amount of time. That'll repeat itself over here again, another 5 set on the back side here. 1, 2, 3 for the middle, 4 and 5. And drop those down. And then we'll see the same type of pattern over there, the 4 as that rotates over. And we'll see maybe a bay and a half that goes inside that U shape. And you see that U shape between here, and then it's caught. The building is sort of organized then by sort of skyways that connects the service area between the administration offices in both facilities. Up the top, it's just a 3-bed windows, center aisle on the other side beneath the clock, which has its own squarish frame, another 3 set up here, 2 and 3. And then, like I said before, a series of columns that wrap around there. So that gives us at least a platen to start to put down the language of the architecture. Coming over to the Neo-Gothic frame, we're going to take basically 2 on each corner, which will bisect this then. We have that original line there. Drop that down. And then 3 in between that, and the next time it bends over. So we'll see 1/2 of the bend on this side. And now we'll have a triptych run down on this face. And again, we're sketching, so this would be very dogmatic if we tried to draw every window in the same and delineate it. But we're going to try to enhance it as much as we can within the given hour to show as much idea of the concept as anything else. So that runs around the side. We get the same thing over here. Then we see a little bit of the last bay as it rotates away from us. And then another triptych of windows, 1, 2, and 3, coming down here. 1, 2, and 3. Now, because this is sort of a Gothic throw of height and verticality, the idea was to run the language as far as it can go until it had its spring point into the celebrated force of what would be holding up Cyrus McCormick's office in the octagonal spaces up here. So that throw is unimpeded. Whereas in the classical language, a little more staid. It still is a very vertical building, but it's stayed by having these breaks and partie elements of the classical language, which change that flow. So here's where it rotates around the corner. We see this face primarily, and then we'll see just a little bit of it coming down onto this side as it wraps around and finds the tower over there. So now we can move up to 3 and start to do just a little bit of a highlight of some of the pattern we need for the windows. So with the small nib of the number 3, we're just going to do a series of pairs. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All the way across. That can wrap down this way. We'll take it all the way down. We'll take it down here. We're not going to try to be quite dogmatic and do it the entire way. We'll kind of break it apart from time. So here is in the little break section, and now we'll start to drop them down in sequence, and then just have them fade away, then maybe pick it up again, just to show some variety across the elevation. And here, where it's a bit more commercial-like space, there are horizontal banded windows, more plate glass. And the largest glass is at the base here. You see more like piers supporting the structure rather than sinuous light ideas. And now in our foreground, we've got one of these light posts for the river edge. And it's kind of on an Egyptian obelisk type of view, a big stone aspect that comes down and then joins the walkway in front. And so we'll have the lamps themselves visible. And that's a nice piece for the foreground. We'll draw the base edge of that 3 or 3.5 foot wall for the edge of the walkway. What the people walk by back and forth, a very large, elaborate sidewalk adjacent to the river. And so that'll be a nice foundation to show our distance away from that with something foreground for us. Over here, it's even less poignant the numbers of windows we put in because we're seeing them with all the tracing between the glass that comes up. So rather than draw certain dedicated individual windows, we'll just come back in line in between our brackets we've already established. Because it's more important to show the vertical throw of this than individual sheets of glass. And I'll take that up. And then the one part where we do see individual panels more is right at the point in the center which faces us. And then we see a series of paired windows for the, obviously the most important offices for the Tribune company up top. And up here, we've got the triptych of 3 nice dark windows there. And then inside the colonnade, one in the center is largest, the ones on the side are thinner as they wrap around. Now we'll take some of the Wrigley Building's language over to this side. If we assume it's more of a morning sun to make a crisp aspect, this basically faces west, so it hasn't made that corner turn at all. We can really establish right away, certainly with number 3 here, that we will keep these 2 sides using the blunt edge in shade. And that'll make this be more prominent as a bolder white in front of it. Wrap those up and around. And same is true for its twin, a little bit further to the north. And so that starts to give us some definition. This is parallel to 3 sides, so the west side of the Tribune Tower then. Make sure we keep the white of the sky between the 2 buildings here. This whole side will also go, but now we're going to go top to bottom. It's got more of a vertical run to it. So that kind of allocates what we're going to do. To articulate the movement of this nice 3-dimensional sculptural piece up here, which has got the great, again, Neo-Gothic sort of French style to it. It's got so much sculptural ability and it's rotating around in 8 different fashions that really, if you just looked at the projected cast shadow on them, we could actually form those quicker than trying to draw each one. So if you move from right to left, right here on the throw of that one, it's in cast shadow. from the two that are in the center that face us, they come down and project a shadow between them onto that window area we just did. On the left side, on the top octagon, that's in shade. On the buttress next to it, that's in shade. The left side of this buttress is in shade. There's a throne shadow over here, and then a cast shadow on that as well. So just looking at light more than the actual material itself to see where the shade and shadows, we can build up the language of that having this very sculptural piece at the top. A little more rigorous up here and formal. We can start at the top here and show the underside with those attention to wrapping the fishhooks around the edge, and then the left side of the temple, which is facing to the west, and then edge this side of it against the sky. And again, a little bit darker at the top. We'll repeat that several times all the way probably to 70 or 80%. And that's very white tower. This is a whole white facade. This is receiving direct south light here. So they're both blazing white. So what we want to do is show then something in the backdrop, which would be a building north of the Gothic tower, which doesn't receive light. It might even be in direct shadow. But that'll be a nice dark. It'll come down to Michigan Avenue and separate the two buildings. So at this point, it's sky. Beneath there, it's just more Chicago architecture. So that gives us a space differential. We'll come back and highlight that more. Then we can work with some more of just projected. We're outside the scope of the image, but the paper here is keeping the whole series of sessions here is horizontal. Sometimes it's hard with a vertical element, but we can simply take some of the lines of just generic buildings over here of scale at the same side and continue with that method of just building the boxes of Chicago back then as a way to kind of anchor both sides here. Because again, the city was being rebuilt from scratch since 1871. It's actually one of the stars on the Chicago flag. There are two blue lines horizontal, which represent the lake and the river, and there's 4 stars, 2 for disasters and 2 for celebrations. The 2 disasters, the Dearborn Massacre and the Chicago Fire, there are 2 stars of sort of popular culture, the 2 World's Fairs. From 1893, the Columbian Exposition, 400 years after Columbus discovered America, and then the other one from 1933, which was kind of the first international event in Chicago that celebrated the real dawn of contemporary theater of engineering and the prospects of the future. So what we can do now is to make this seem more white up here, so we can come up to the edge of the tower and maybe put in the idea if that's going to be a nice, lovely bulbous cloud up here that will come in between the space, and we'll do a darker tone on sky adjacent to our towers here. So I come up to the edge of this one. This is just sort of a drier number 3 now. And then we'll fade it out to the left as we move along here. This side. And this 3 is getting fairly dry, so I'll shift out when I want more value here. It's nice now for the clouds, though, to work with a drier marker. And then it'll blend out easier for us. And then maybe that cloud moves off in the distance over here, so we carry a little bit of that over this way. And maybe above the back of it, it goes dark again. And we carry a bit more down to the grade. But again, that's what you're going to use, that kind of separate and pull out the values, use your sky and cloud to help celebrate the architecture. Okay, then we can move up to number 4 and get a little deeper with some of the fenestration here and some of the axis and details. So let's go left to right now. There was a little bit of a classical turret and tower over here at the top of this piece. We'll edge the sky area for both of these. And then we'll pick up some of the fenestration up here on these blocks again. Again, when we turn the corner here, it's not even much of a blob at all. It really is just a fine line. So be careful not to go too thick here. And then simply work that down. Like it's sort of a gesture, not too specific. Come back into this side, make the windows that are closest to us a little bit darker, and then wrap those around the corner too, certainly at the top, because our eye will be attracted because they're towers, and naturally it's almost like with a set of stairs in a sketch, the eye moves up the stairs. In a tower, it moves up to the top of the tower. Our eyes are drawn at the base where we are, and we follow it up to where the information kisses the sky. Drop these guys down. Make sure you keep the windows in perspective going back properly. And then we'll edge this part. It will come in darker and darker over time here as we finish up the sketch, because we want this to be a bright area where the sun's coming over the top here and lighting a section of this. And you can see in the photograph, it comes to about this point here and lights up this top section. So that'll go darker adjacent to it. This will go darker next to it here. And then using number 4, it's a start to realize that this is actually in a cast shadow area. It's a nice pocket of loss of light due to the building's design. Start up here with the number 4 and have that come down, because it's always going to appear darker. It's the same tone the whole way because it's just a shadow thrown on a building, but it's going to appear darker next to the white of the cloud behind it. Come to the top of the number 4. Inside the little tempietto. And then back to parts of the cast shadow we showed before. Some of the windows, cast area. And now this whole face of this, like we did before with the number 3, can be then again broached with the number 4 to make sure it pulls off that back white. So start at the top where it'll be a little bit stronger, where it meets its context of the graphic up above, and then pull that striping down. You can all the way down to grade and then end it right where it comes to our significant line at the base by the river's edge. If we edge that top, now because we're rising up a ramp on, not a ramp, but there's an incline on Wabash at this point. So the horizon line at the person's head remains flat across the way. So we're actually dipping down the road as we make our way up here. And we could probably assign a value for to sectionalize that, to put that wall in pieces, just so we understand that's the foreground image we want. And then up to the curb cut till we get to the street. You can decide later how much value you want to put in the person. Okay, maybe we'll go back to 3 really quickly because we forgot about this back section here, where it steps back in about 4 bays of windows, but then you can see it's a T-in plan. So on this edge, it bumps out a bit, so there'll be a return of the shadow here that's stronger. And it is secondary to this, so we can simply kind of pull it away by showing less light hitting that section of it. And carry some of that value into the distant buildings here too. And now we can move up to 5. Working left to right, come back to fenestration. Again, this is a suggestion of the fenestration to get the imagination started. It's not a rendered application of the actual true placement of things. And again, probably be more pronounced with the language as you come to the top, because that's where the eye will find its terminus. I'll come back in again at the top over here, and we'll find the apex of its fenestration at the top here. So it's more grays within the gray. These wrap around and show 1, 2, and 3 there. And then we see the one around the corner. And we'll start with almost like a very tall, thin arch that gets thrown the whole length of the building. And that kind of drives all the way down for us. And then periodically there's a little horizontal for the base of the windows that's within those arches. So from this distance, it's really more important to see the throw of those long arches than it is to actually see individual windows. We'll return over here on that side of our corner anchor. These elements of these 2 bays of windows wrapped around the corner. And it becomes much darker over here. And then within those dark areas, we do see a little, again, shadow of those windows moving in and out. It's a little finial piece. Detail over on the lake side. And now on the tops, we'll come and start to do some of the finials that come when you have the throw. It's the dead weight, which is protecting this from coming out. I don't know how much that is actually purposefully structural because of all the steel on the inside. But it does become ornamental vertically at these pier levels. And we'll go a little bit deeper with the windows on both sides of the front throw. So get more articulation, and obviously that'll build up as we move to 6, 7, and 8. Coming down, there's very little on this side to do other than probably just break that line away from the tower, which is set back from it, the clock tower. So that edge is important, and that's important, but that white is very brilliant here. We might bring back a 2% eventually to this corner to separate and make this little sliver the brightest white right here. As we wrap around that side. And that type of detail that runs all the way around 3 sides of it here helps make that turn for us. And then again here too, even though this is fronting the face of us, we see ever so slight of a projection of a diagonal line coming back on the lakeside face of the clock tower. And that little bit will help that thing seem more 3-dimensional up top. And shadow for our perceiver at the base there. And that was 5. Now we're moving up to 6. Now our final shadow detailing moving across the scheme. Again, let's just keep going left to right. And we're pretending that we're still back in the 20s and 30s and nothing's really competed for the presence of this image until later on in post-World War II. Because now in this image, there's buildings that fill up this whole area until you get to the lakefront. There's more down here as Michigan Avenue gets rebuilt more vertically with commerce and residential. We're kind of doing this more random now to show activity behind the glass so that they're not all treated the same. Different types of shading. Some are open, some are closed. When the shade's down, it's white. There's no dark at all. And we get these large panels that are referred to as the Chicago window, which basically has a fixed plate in the center and two operable ones on the side. This is all built obviously pre-air conditioning. So the key for success for rental space is to have utilitarian needs in the offices. That's why there were more courtyard buildings back then, because trying to get fresh air and natural light into the deeper rooms on the inside. And they will come with a series of threes. Chase down the tower of the Wrigley. And we could put in the time here right now. When this photo was taken, it was almost 11 o'clock. And I'll come down and show a little bit of the underside, the cast shadow of our public bastion for light. I think we missed one of the orbs over on this side closest to us. And this is important. Down. And one wall comes down and meets the sidewalk. It's probably a stronger line. Back in here, have it be darkest right at the base. Edge is really important to pull it off that light sky. And now we can move to 7. Some not only did obviously countries and different cities around the world submit their competition entries, but also really famous architects from the lexicon of the modern movement. So when Walter Gropius and Bruno Taut and Adolf Loos submitted, they did strip away all the language of history and showed more of a progressive, forward-looking building in terms of what skyscrapers could be. The appetite wasn't there yet. It took all the way through to the Great Depression and a little bit beyond before generic culture was kind of ready for the opportunity to change things. And when you go through 2 world wars and depression, the architecture of the past seems to be not deemed as appropriate anymore. And so those changes happened after, on a very fast pace after World War II. So start at the top again. Now we're coming in with that heavier line of the 7. So you're using it less, particular points. You'll see just parts, the underside of windows, the right part that shows the depth of the actual wall frame itself, instead of the whole plates going dark and black, for instance. And then once the building steps away from us, we show less of that type of dark, obviously. In that corner. There's a corner to pull this off from its twin. This edge is important. The top of this and the break between parts of the wall here. Particularly the part of the wall directly in front of us, probably less so on this side. Out by the sky, closer to the road. Edging again. And there at the darkest part, it's when the arch of the flying buttress goes up and we see the underside of it. So wherever that happens, or a very strong cast shadow in some of the components here. Some of those windows that go up are darker. And if you can do more value right towards the corner edge here, because that's the closest part of the building for us. And again, pulling down this almost like draping of glass that proceeds from the bottom up. And against the sky on this side. And this edge will be important because it separates the front section of the Tribune Tower from its T-shaped lakeside edge. So that's 7. Now we can move to 8. We close in on our final details here, and we'll do some wash with the 2 and 3 just to kind of blend things together again. So we'll go top to bottom. Show a little bit of that lip of the rim of this Tempietto moving around, and some of the left side getting darker. And a chance for some darkening at the tops, as long as you can see inside of the underside of that aspect over there. Maybe just the right side of these windows up here now. Maybe the edge there, the windows in the corner. Pull out this zone of windows that are closest to us. Once the pattern's established, your viewer then will just assume it's meant to be for the entire space, and as time allows, it's better to move on. Pull it back there. Right at this edge as well, just a little bit less than the front edge. And it indicates that side. Over here, just by the front corner. Down to the ground, and now deeper into. So we just go up the order of the realm of the markers until we hit 9, repeating steps 5, 6, and 7 along the way. A little bit darker there. That edge. And number 9. Okay, that's enough of that. We'll probably come back now and just start with the 3 again. Try to, since now whenever you put it in, it seems pretty strong as the drawing sets up, it kind of loses some of its power and value. So we'll come start with the 4, move to maybe 5 and 6, just to make the edges a little bit stronger. So wherever we push the light, we're going to reinforce it now and gradate it. So it's not one tone here. The tone is brightest right where it meets the light. So bring that next to there, and makes that more of a powerful light against the sky, and drop it down a bit. And that way you get a little bit of patina wearing the materials over time too. We'll take in 4 and bring that sky blue behind it a little bit darker right to the edge of the tower. And behind it. Let that fade out. And where there's white over here, we can come back in with a little bit of value to the great Neo-Gothic detail up there. So it's darker against the sky now. Come over here to the edge, make it go darkest right against the white. Follow it over here to this edge. Darker at the top, let it fade to lighter gray, maybe a little bit darker at the base as it hits the river's edge here. Hold this down and make sure that turn is very important here. So the floor is working well for us to just with your pressure point now, just drive that ink into those areas. A little bit of a movement of this so we see this side of it as well. And now, because this is a cast shadow here, we want to work into the shadow side and make it even darker than the shade side. So we'll start with that a little bit stronger at the top. Maybe I'll have to hit that with a 5-2 in a second, just to build that out. So we've got a variety of values, the sun side hitting it, the shade side not receiving the light, and then this building casting the shadows. So we've got light, middle, and darkest right here to make sure that moves on the page. We have the top of this gradate a bit more from the sky area. There's the backdrop there. And I think we'll take the floor and simply wash out the sidewalk here. And we'll do it kind of from our vanishing point as if there's construction joint lines that move across here. So coming from that point, they're perpendicular to the road. They're kind of having this pattern of dark. We'll leave some light in between them. That'll help set that down and give a little bit more of a thicker base for the building to rest on. Obviously, the foreground is always important for us too. Maybe just for the backdrop here, but in some kind of tone for those buildings in the distance, something generic. Then for the scale of things, here's some taller light standards that are in the area too. And maybe come back in and build up that cloud formation, because now these clouds are in the distance, and so they're the same types of clouds, but they're much smaller on the paper. And with the drywood, you can kind of make that bulbous effect with them passing by and moving toward the lakefront. The same over here around this one. And now with number 6, I'll probably do one little finality of pushing the value to strengthen in all cases. So I'd say this edge could be crisper, move against that white. And then this edge could be crisper to define that cast shadow. And I think we're just about done. It's turned into the modern era and see some of the blending of tradition with the promise of steel in the 20th century. Try to hold these two up for you now. That's Neighbor, across Michigan Avenue, probably right about somewhere in there. Lighting's different with the dot cam, but I think you can see the kind of the view shed there for those two. So what the Tribune Tower also allows for now. It's been converted into condos now. The Tribune is with the dwarfing of constituents reading papers these days. They've shifted away from the building, and now it's high-end condo pieces inside. And what's been at the base of it are hundreds of pieces of fragments of other buildings or part from culture that have been embedded in the actual Tribune Tower as its information of these things. So, for instance, there are a rock that Buzz Aldrin brought back from the moon. There's a piece of steel from the World Trade Center. There's a part of Chartres Cathedral. There's just elements that are all on the first two floors. So you walk by, it's a collection of kind of the world's, if this is the world's newspaper back in the day. So it's got a great presence to it. It's a real linchpin between how people respond to the 260 schemes. The winning scheme by most critics came in second place. The one they gave it to was sort of a throwback to the historical pieces. Hood and Holland of New York, who designed it. The second place was a Finnish group, Ilil Saarinen, that built something that seemed to step away from rote historicism and adapted the language of the skyscraper into its own form of vocabulary away from history itself. And so we'll see that in future sessions as we draw more into architecture.